They called him the King of Ice. Dominic Blackwood didn't just reject women, he dismantled them. For 5 years, the most beautiful, wealthy, and powerful she-wolves in the continent lined up at the Obsidian Hall, begging for a single glance from the Alpha King. He refused every single one. No one was good enough. No one was strong enough. The world thought he was heartless. But they were wrong. He wasn't waiting for a queen who roared. He was waiting for the one wolf who didn't make a sound. And on a rainy Tuesday in November, while the rest of the world looked at the diamonds, the king looked at the dust. The air inside the Obsidian Hall was so thick with expensive perfume and fear that it was hard to breathe. Outside, the storm battered against the stained glass windows, but inside the silence was absolute. King Dominic Blackwood sat on his throne, his posture relaxed, but his eyes lethal. He was a man carved from granite and shadows 6'4" of raw, predatory aggression, wrapped in a $3,000 bespoke suit. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a weapon. Standing before him was Lady Jessica Thorne, the daughter of the Southern Alpha. She was stunning. She wore a dress made of red silk that cost more than most people earned in a decade. Her hair was perfect. Her smile was practiced. "King Dominic," she purred, stepping forward, "my father offers you the Southern Territories, 3 diamond mines, and my hand in marriage. Together, we would be unstoppable." Dominic didn't even blink. He swirled the amber liquid in his crystal glass, bored. "Is that it?" Jessica faltered. I beg your pardon." "I asked if that was it." Dominic said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "You offer me land I can conquer in a day, and money I don't need, and in exchange I have to listen to your voice for the rest of my life." A collective gasp ripped through the room. "Get her out of my sight," Dominic said, waving a hand dismissively. "Next." Jessica burst into tears and ran. The guards, stone-faced, didn't move. In the far back corner of the hall, half hidden behind a massive marble pillar, Ivy Sutton flinched. She adjusted her grip on the heavy velvet coat she was holding. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't a debutante. She was the luggage rack. Ivy was 20 years old, but she looked younger. She was small, too thin, and dressed in a shapeless grey uniform that smelled like industrial detergent. Her stepmother Beatrice had forced her to come along tonight, not as a participant, but to hold the furs and purses for her half-sister, Isabella. "Stop fidgeting, you little rat," Beatrice hissed, pinching Ivy's arm hard enough to bruise. "Isabella is up next. If you embarrass us, you'll sleep in the kennel tonight." "Yes, Mum," Ivy whispered, looking down at her worn-out sneakers. Ivy was used to being invisible. In the Sutton pack, she was an anomaly, a wolf with no scent, no shift, and no voice. Her father had been the Alpha, but her mother had been a rogue he met in a passing town. When her father died, Beatrice took over and Ivy became the pack slave. Next, the royal beta, a scarred man named Silas, barked. Isabella straightened her spine. She was beautiful in a predatory way, blonde and sharp. She checked her reflection in her compact mirror, handed the mirror to Ivy without looking, and strutted toward the throne. Ivy shrank back into the shadows. She just wanted this night to end. Her feet ached, and she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. "King Dominic." Isabella announced, her voice ringing clear. "I am Isabella Sutton of the River Rock Pack. I don't offer you mines or land. I offer you a true Luna. Someone who can handle your intensity." Dominic looked at her. For a second, the room held its breath. Isabella was the favorite to win. She was ruthless, just like him. Dominic stood up. The movement was sudden and violent. The chair scraped against the stone. He walked down the steps of the dais slowly, like a panther stalking a deer. He circled Isabella. He leaned in, sniffing the air near her neck. Isabella smiled triumphant. "He likes my scent," she thought. "You smell," Dominic said softly, "like ambition and desperation." Isabella's smile froze. "You don't want me." Dominic continued, his voice echoing in the silent hall. "You want the crown. You want the title. You want to be the woman who tamed the beast." He stopped in front of her, his gold eyes flashing. "But you are not a wolf, Isabella. You are a leech in a designer dress." Isabella turned pale. "My king!" "Leave," Dominic growled. The command used his alpha voice, a supernatural force that made every wolf in the room want to drop to their knees. "All of you, get out. The selection is over. I am done with this circus." Chaos erupted. Mothers grabbed their daughters. Fathers cursed under their breath. The humiliation was total. "Move!" Beatrice shrieked, shoving Ivy toward the exit. "We're leaving that arrogant bastard." Ivy stumbled, dropping the heavy fur coat she was holding. It hit the floor with a soft thud. "You clumsy idiot!" Beatrice raised her hand to strike Ivy right there in the hall. "Don't touch her." The voice didn't come from a guard. It didn't come from a guest. It came from the king. The silence that fell over the obsidian hall this time was different. It wasn't the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of terror. Beatrice's hand froze in mid-air. She turned slowly, her face draining of color. King Dominic was standing 10 feet away. He wasn't looking at Beatrice. He wasn't looking at Isabella. He was looking at the floor, specifically at the girl scrambling to pick up a coat. Ivy's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She kept her head down, her hair falling like a curtain over her face. "Please don't look at me. Please don't look at me." "I said," Dominic repeated, taking a slow step forward. "Don't touch her." Beatrice swallowed hard, forcing a trembling smile. "Oh, Your Majesty, forgive the interruption. This is just the help. She's clumsy. A useless thing, really. We were just removing her from your presence." "Is that so?" Dominic murmured. He walked past Isabella as if she were furniture. He walked past Beatrice, who was now trembling so hard her jewelry rattled. He stopped directly in front of Ivy. Ivy was still on her knees, clutching the dirty fur coat to her chest. She stared at the polished black tips of his shoes. They were Italian leather, spotless. "Stand up," Dominic commanded. It wasn't a shout. It was a request wrapped in iron. Ivy shakily got to her feet. She was short, barely reaching his chest. She kept her eyes glued to his tie knot. "Look at me," he said. Ivy hesitated. In her pack, making eye contact with an alpha was a punishable offense. She had scars on her back to prove it. "Look at me." Ivy slowly lifted her chin. When her eyes met his, the world tilted. She expected to see anger. She expected to see the cold, dead eyes of a tyrant. Instead, she saw gold. Molten, burning gold. For Dominic, the moment her eyes met his, the air left his lungs. He had spent 10 years searching. He had traveled to Paris, Tokyo, New York. He had attended thousands of these insufferable balls. He had smelled every perfume, every pheromone, every desperate attempt at seduction. But this girl, she smelled like rain. Not the storm outside, but the quiet, clean scent of the earth after a downpour. She smelled like lavender and old books, and something uniquely painfully sweet. Mate. The word slammed into his mind with the force of a freight train. His wolf, a beast that usually slept in a cage of indifference, roared to life, scratching at his chest, screaming, "Mine!" He took a step closer. The crowd gasped. "What is your name?" Dominic asked. His voice was rough, strained. Ivy opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She coughed, trying to clear her throat. "Ivy!" she whispered. "Ivy Sutton." Ivy. Dominic tested the name on his tongue. He liked it. It suited her. Resilient. Climbing. "Why are you crying, Ivy?" Ivy touched her cheek. She hadn't realized she was crying. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I'll leave. I didn't mean to disturb you." She tried to step back, but Dominic reached out, his hand large and warm wrapped around her wrist. A shockwave of static electricity zipped through them both. Ivy gasped, dropping the coat again. "You aren't leaving," Dominic said, his thumb brushing over the pulse point on her wrist. He could feel her heart racing. "In fact, you aren't going anywhere with these people." Beatrice stepped forward, foolishly brave. "Your Majesty, surely you jest. Ivy she is defective. She has no wolf. She is a mute, practically. You cannot possibly be interested in—" Dominic turned his head. He didn't shout. He just looked at Beatrice with a gaze so full of violence that the woman took a step back and tripped over her own dress. "One more word," Dominic said softly, "and I will tear your tongue out of your head in front of this entire court." Beatrice clamped her mouth shut. Dominic turned back to Ivy. The anger vanished from his face, replaced by an intensity that made Ivy's knees weak. "You," Dominic said, raising his voice so the entire hall could hear, "are the only thing in this room that is real." He turned to his head of security, a massive man named Kane. "Kane." "Yes, Alpha. Escort the Sutton family out, revoke their invitation, ban them from the city." "No!" Isabella screamed. "You can't do this. She's nothing. She's a bastard." And what Dominic continued ignoring the screaming woman. "Prepare the royal suite." He looked back down at Ivy, who was trembling, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. It was a gesture of old-world reverence that no one had seen him perform in a decade. "You're staying here, Ivy," he whispered against her skin. "Why?" She breathed. Dominic smiled, and it was the first genuine smile the court had seen in 5 years. It was terrifying. "Because," he said, "I have been waiting for you my entire life." The doors to the royal suite were made of mahogany and reinforced with steel. Ivy stood in the center of the room, feeling like an astronaut on a different planet. The room was larger than the entire house she grew up in. There was a fireplace roaring with warmth, a bed covered in silk sheets, and a balcony that overlooked the sprawling city of Seattle. But Ivy didn't feel lucky. She felt trapped. She knew how stories like this went. The Alpha King takes a shiny new toy. He plays with it for a week. Then he realizes the toy is broken, boring, or plain, and he throws it away. And when he threw her away, Beatrice would be waiting. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," Ivy squeaked. The door opened and Dominic walked in. He had removed his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his white dress shirt, revealing forearms corded with muscle and covered in faint white scars. He held a tray of food. "You didn't eat at the banquet," he said, setting the tray down on a small table. It was simple food, roasted chicken vegetables, warm bread. "I assume Beatrice didn't feed you." Ivy stared at the food. Her stomach growled loudly. She flushed red. "I'm not hungry, Your Majesty." "Liar," Dominic said, but his tone was gentle. He pulled out a chair. "Sit. Eat. I'm not going to hurt you." Ivy sat. She took a bite of bread. Then another. Soon she was eating quickly, unable to stop. Dominic watched her leaning against the mantel of the fireplace. He wasn't leering. He was studying her like a scientist who had discovered a new element. "Why me?" Ivy asked, wiping her mouth with a linen napkin. "You sent away heiresses and supermodels. I'm nobody." "You think you're nobody Because you've been told that by people who are blind, Dominic said. He walked over and sat in the chair opposite her. Do you know what I saw in that hall, Ivy? A mess. Silence, Dominic said. Peace. Everyone else in that room was screaming for my attention. Their minds were loud, their scents were loud. But you were quiet. And underneath that quiet, I saw something else. What? Steel, he said. You were terrified, but you stood your ground. You dropped that coat, but you didn't run. You have endured a life that would have broken weaker wolves, and you are still standing. Ivy looked down. I don't have a wolf, Your Majesty. I can't shift. I'm useless to a king. Dominic reached across the table. He tucked a strand of her mousy brown hair behind her ear. His touch was electric. I don't need a wolf, he said fiercely. I need a partner. And as for your wolf, I think she's not gone. I think she's just hiding, waiting for it to be safe. He stood up. Sleep, Ivy. No one enters this room without my permission. You are safe here. He walked to the door. Wait, Ivy said. Dominic paused, his hand on the brass handle. My family, she whispered. Beatrice. She won't let this go. She has connections. Dangerous ones. Dominic's eyes darkened. A shadow passed over his face, making him look less like a man and more like the monster the tabloids claimed he was. Let her try, Dominic said. If she comes for you, Ivy, I will burn her world to ash and salt the earth, so nothing ever grows there again. He closed the door. Ivy was alone, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't lonely. 3 days passed. 3 days where Ivy lived in a state of high anxiety luxury. Dominic was intense. He didn't sleep in her bed, respecting a boundary she hadn't even verbalized, but he slept on the couch in her sitting room. He claimed it was for security, but every time she woke up in the night, panicked from a nightmare about Beatrice's basement, she found him watching her, his golden eyes glowing in the dark, like guardian lamps. He fed her. He bought her clothes, not gaudy ball gowns, but soft cashmere sweaters, tailored jeans, and sturdy boots. Things that made her feel solid, real. But the castle wasn't impenetrable. On Thursday night, Dominic was called away to the war room. A border dispute with a neighboring Alpha required his immediate violent attention. He left reluctantly, leaving Kane, his massive head of security, stationed outside her door. Do not open this door for anyone but me. Dominic had commanded, kissing her forehead with a searing intensity before leaving. Ivy sat by the fireplace, reading a book about wolf history she'd found on the shelf. The castle was dead silent. Then the lights flickered out. Ivy froze. The only light came from the dying embers of the fire. She heard a thud outside her door, heavy wet like a sack of potatoes hitting the floor. Kane, she whispered. Silence. The handle of the heavy mahogany door slowly turned. It was locked. Then there was a hiss like acid eating through metal. The lock melted. The door creaked open. 3 figures slid into the room. They were dressed in tactical black, smelling of rain mud and rogue desperation. They weren't palace guards. They were mercenaries. Ivy dropped the book. She backed away toward the balcony doors. There she is, one of them growled, his voice distorted by a mask. The little mute princess. Grab her! Beatrice said she wants her alive, but she didn't say unharmed. Rough her up a bit for the trouble. Beatrice. Of course. Terror cold and familiar washed over Ivy. This was her life. She was prey. She would always be prey. The closest rogue lunged. Something snapped inside Ivy. For 20 years she had taken the beatings. She had starved. She had hidden in corners. But she wasn't in Beatrice's basement anymore. She was in the king's suite. She was wearing clothes that didn't have holes in them. She had eaten 3 meals today. She wasn't that girl anymore. As the rogue reached for her, Ivy didn't cower. She grabbed the heavy iron fire poker from the hearth. It was still hot from the fire. With a scream that tore her own throat raw, she swung it with all her might. Clang! The hot iron connected with the rogue's ribs. He howled more in shock than pain and stumbled back. "You little bitch!" The second rogue snarled, pulling a silver knife from his belt. Silver, lethal to wolves. Ivy swung again, wild and desperate. She caught the second rogue on the forearm, knocking the knife away, but there were 3 of them. The third one tackled her from behind. She hit the expensive Persian rug hard, the air knocked out of her lungs. Heavy hands grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. "Enough playing!" The leader growled, pinning her down. He pulled out a syringe filled with a murky purple liquid. Wolfsbane concentrated enough to knock out an alpha. "Night-night, Cinderella." The needle moved toward her neck. Ivy struggled, kicking, biting, thrashing, but he was too heavy. She closed her eyes, waiting for the prick. Then the room exploded. The balcony doors didn't just open, they shattered inward. Glass rained down like diamonds. A roar shook the very foundations of the castle, a sound so primal, so filled with pure, unadulterated rage, that the rogues froze in abject terror. Dominic stood on the balcony threshold. He wasn't entirely human. His canines were elongated, his claws tore through the expensive Italian leather of his shoes, and his eyes were 2 pools of liquid fire. The mate Bond had screamed at him across the castle that she was in danger. Get off her. It wasn't a command. It was a death sentence. Dominic moved faster than human eyes could track. He crossed the room in a blur. He grabbed the rogue holding the needle by the back of his neck and threw him. The man flew across the room, smashing into a heavy oak wardrobe with bone-shattering force. He didn't get up. The other 2 rogues scrambled, forgetting their paycheck, forgetting Beatrice. They just wanted to survive the king of beasts. They didn't stand a chance. Dominic didn't shift fully. He didn't need to. He was a whirlwind of violence in a torn suit. He broke arms, shattered knees, and tossed grown men around like rag dolls. Within 30 seconds, the 3 attackers were unconscious heaps on the floor. Dominic stood in the center of the carnage, his chest heaving. The beast was very close to the surface. He turned, wildly looking for Ivy. She was curled up near the fireplace, shaking, still clutching the fire poker. The moment he saw her, the rage drained out of him, replaced by a sickening terror. He fell to his knees and crawled the last few feet to her. "Ivy!" He choked out, his voice wrecked. "Ivy, look at me. Are you hurt? Did they touch you with the silver?" He reached for her, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Ivy flinched. That flinch broke his heart faster than any silver bullet. He froze, pulling his hands back as if burned. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his eyes wild with self-hatred. "I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm a monster." "I know." Ivy looked at him. She saw the blood on his knuckles, not his own. She saw the wreckage of the room. She saw the king who terrified nations kneeling on a rug, terrified that he had scared her. She dropped the poker. Slowly, timidly, she reached out and placed her small, cold hand over his heart. It was beating so fast it felt like a hummingbird's wing. "You came back," she whispered, her voice raspy from screaming. Dominic covered her hand with his own, pressing it harder against his chest. "I will always come back for you, Ivy, even if I have to crawl out of hell to do it." He scooped her up into his arms, ignoring her protests that she could walk. He carried her away from the broken glass and the unconscious bodies toward the bed. But as he laid her down on the silk sheets, Ivy gasped. A sudden searing pain ripped through her spine, sharper than any beating Beatrice had ever given her. Her back arched off the mattress. "Ivy, what is it?" Dominic demanded, panic returning instantly. "It burns!" she gasped, clutching at her chest. "Dominic, it burns! Inside!" Her skin was suddenly boiling hot to the touch. Sweat beaded on her forehead instantly. Her bones began to grind together with a sickening sound. Dominic recognized the signs. He had gone through it himself at 16. It wasn't poison. It wasn't an injury. "Get Dr. Thorne!" Dominic roared at the guards now rushing into the destroyed room. "Get him now, she's shifting." The royal physician, Dr. Aris Thorne, was a man who had seen everything. He had patched up alphas after territorial wars and delivered breech birth pups in the dead of winter. But he had never seen anything like this. For 12 hours Ivy screamed. Her body was rejecting the shift. It was too late in life. Her human side, beaten down and malnourished for years, was fighting a losing battle against the sudden surge of supernatural energy triggered by the trauma of the attack and the proximity of her mate. Dominic refused to leave the room. He paced the perimeter like a caged animal, growling at nurses who moved too slowly. He held Ivy's hand while her bones broke and reset, taking her pain into himself through the bond until his own nose bled. "Her heart rate is erratic, my king," Dr. Thorne said, his voice tight with worry, checking the monitors they had hooked up to her. "Her body isn't strong enough for the transition. If her wolf doesn't break through soon, the magic will burn her out from the inside. She will die. She will not die." Dominic snarled, his voice vibrating the medical equipment. "Do something." "There is nothing medical I can do. This is spiritual now. Her wolf is dormant, buried deep under years of trauma. You have to call it out, Alpha. Only her mate can do it." Dominic looked down at Ivy. She was unconscious now, exhausted from the pain, her breath shallow and rattling. She looked so small in the massive bed. He leaned down, putting his lips right next to her ear. "Ivy," he whispered, "listen to me. I know you're scared. I know you've spent your whole life hiding because it was the only way to survive. But you don't have to hide anymore." He placed a hand on her burning abdomen. "I am here. I am the king, and I am telling you it is safe to come out now. Come out and fight, little one. Fight for me. Fight for us." He poured his own alpha power into her, a risky move that could kill them both if their energies clashed. He sent a wave of pure, unadulterated strength and dominance down the bond. Ivy's body jerked violently on the bed. Her eyes snapped open. They weren't human brown anymore. They were pure, glowing violet. A sound tore from her throat that wasn't a scream. It was a howl. It was high, clear, and piercing. Her back arched violently. The sound of cracking bones filled the room, sickening and loud. Her skin split fur, pushing through rapidly. Her face elongated, her jaw snapping out of alignment to reform into a muzzle. It was brutal. It was bloody. It was magnificent. Dominic stepped back, giving her space, watching in awe as the girl who used to be luggage transformed. Within 2 minutes the thrashing stopped. On the bed, panting heavily, stood a wolf. She was not the muddy brown or grey of a common pack wolf. She was pure white. Not cream, not ivory. White. Like fresh snow under moonlight. Her fur was thick and lustrous, completely hiding the scars of her human skin. She was smaller than Dominic's wolf form, but she was sleek, built for speed and stealth. And her eyes, they remained that startling, vivid violet. Dr. Thorne gasped. "By the goddess! A white wolf! They haven't been seen in 400 years. They are legends, symbols of purity and immense magical power." The white wolf looked around the room, disoriented. She saw the doctor and growled low in her throat, confused by the strange scents. Then she looked at Dominic. She froze. She took a hesitant step toward him on the mattress, her ears flattened slightly in uncertainty. Dominic didn't hesitate. He began to unbutton his ruined shirt, tossing it aside. "Everyone out," Dominic commanded, never taking his eyes off the white wolf. "Now." The doctor and nurses fled. Dominic let go. His own shift was instantaneous, a practiced explosion of power. Where Ivy was snow and light, Dominic was shadow and obsidian. His wolf was massive, easily 3 times her size, jet black with eyes of burning gold. The giant black wolf stalked toward the bed. He jumped up the mattress, groaning under his weight. He approached the white wolf slowly. She trembled, instinct telling her to submit to an alpha of this size. She lowered her head, exposing her neck in the universal sign of submission. But Dominic didn't bite down to claim her. Instead, the massive black wolf lowered his own head. He nudged her wet nose gently with his own. He licked the blood from her white muzzle, cleaning her, scenting her. He dropped to his front paws, bowing his head lower than hers. The king of beasts was submitting to the quiet girl. Ivy, her wolf mind, clear and sharp for the first time ever understood. He wasn't just accepting her. He was worshipping her. She threw her head back and howled again, a sound of pure liberation. Dominic joined her, his deep, rumbling bass mingling with her clear soprano. The sound echoed out of the castle windows over the city, a declaration that the king was no longer alone, and his queen was no ordinary wolf. The week following Ivy's shift was a whirlwind. Ivy wasn't just Ivy anymore. She was Lady Ivy, the king's chosen. The revelation of her white wolf form had sent shock waves through the kingdom. The superstitious feared her. The opportunistic sought to align with her. But Ivy hated the politics. She spent her days training. Dominic was a relentless teacher. He taught her how to hunt in the royal forests, how to use her smaller size to outmaneuver larger opponents, and how to control the strange hum of magic that now vibrated beneath her skin. She was fast, faster than any guard in the palace. And when she got angry, the air around her crackled with violet energy that could short-circuit lights. But while Ivy grew stronger, the shadows outside the palace grew deeper. The interrogation of the rogue who survived the attack Dominic had taken personal gruesome responsibility for that revealed what they feared. Beatrice wasn't just a bitter stepmother. She was organizing a coup. She had united 4 smaller packs who chafed under Dominic's strict anti-corruption laws. They called themselves the True North Alliance, using Ivy's illegitimate status and Dominic's obsession with her as proof that the king was unfit to rule. "She's gathering an army," Kane reported in the war room one rainy afternoon. Maps covered the massive oak table. "They are camped near the Whispering Pines, about 50 miles north. We estimate 300 wolves." Dominic leaned over the map, his jaw set. 300 against my royal guard of 2,000. It's suicide. What is she thinking? "She's banking on something else," Ivy said. She walked into the war room. She wore black tactical gear similar to Dominic's, her hair tied back in a severe braid. She no longer looked down when she entered a room. Dominic straightened his eyes, softening instantly. "Ivy, you should be resting after training." "I'm done resting," she said, walking to the table and placing a finger on the map. "Beatrice isn't stupid. She knows she can't win a direct fight. She hates me, yes, but she's also terrified of me." "Why?" Dominic frowned. "Because you are now powerful. Because you are mine." "No," Ivy said slowly. "It was before that. She always hated me with a specific kind of fear. Even when I was a child, she didn't just treat me like a bastard. She treated me like a threat that needed to be contained." She looked up at Dominic. "Before the attack, that rogue said something. He said Beatrice wanted me alive to put me in my place. What place? Dominic looked at Kane. Bring me the archives, specifically the lineage records of the Southern Territories before the Great War 20 years ago. 2 hours later, old dusty leather-bound books were spread across the table. Dominic, whose knowledge of history was vast, was searching for something specific. He stopped at a faded family tree. He traced a line with his finger, his face growing pale. "My God," he whispered. "What is it?" Ivy asked, leaning against his arm. "Your mother," Dominic said, looking at her with a mixture of awe and horror. "She wasn't a rogue, Ivy." He pointed to a name recorded in elegant script, Serene Valerius. The House of Valerius was the ruling family of the Silver Moon Kingdom. Dominic explained, his voice tight. They were famous for their powerful female alphas and their rare white coats. They were wiped out 20 years ago in a territorial dispute. Everyone thought the line ended. He looked at Ivy. "Your mother escaped. She hid her scent, hid her heritage to protect you. She met your father, a minor alpha, and thought you'd be safe in obscurity." The realization hit Ivy like a physical blow. She wasn't a bastard. She was royalty, older royalty than Dominic's own line. "Beatrice," Ivy whispered, connecting the dots. "Her maiden name?" "Is Vargas," Kane supplied, checking a tablet. "A minor vassal family to the House of Valerius." "She knew," Ivy's voice turned ice cold. "She knew who my mother was. She knew who I was. If the truth came out, I would have a claim to her lands and half the Southern Territories." Dominic growled a deep, threatening sound. She enslaved a queen to keep her power. The doors to the war room burst open. A breathless perimeter guard skidded to a halt. "My king, emergency." "Speak." "The northern gates. There's a convoy under a flag of parley. It's Lady Beatrice." The room went deathly silent. "She's here." Dominic's voice was dangerously quiet. "Yes, sire, and she's not alone. She has about 50 armed guards, but she also has hostages." Ivy felt a sickening lurch in her stomach. "Who?" The guard looked uncomfortable. "A dozen young women from the surrounding villages. She has them lined up at the gate with silver collars around their necks. She says she will detonate the collars one by one until the fake king hands over the bastard usurper." Dominic's fist hit the oak table so hard it split down the middle. "I will rip her head off." He turned to Kane. "Ready the guard. Full battle rattle. No prisoners." He turned to Ivy, grabbing her shoulders. "You stay here in the bunker. It's the safest place." Ivy looked at his hands on her shoulders. Then she looked into his golden eyes. "No," she said. Dominic blinked. "No. She is at my gate, threatening innocent people because of me." Ivy said, her voice steady, her violet eyes burning. "She enslaved me for 15 years. She tried to have me killed. She is not your fight, Dominic. She is mine." "Ivy, she has an army at her back. You are untrained in warfare. I cannot lose you." "You won't lose me," Ivy said. She reached up and touched his cheek. "But if I hide now, I am still that girl in the corner, holding her coat. The white wolf doesn't hide." She stepped back, the violet energy beginning to hum around her fingers. "I'm coming with you, Alpha, and I'm going to end this." Dominic stared at her for a long heartbeat. He saw the steel he had recognized that very first night. He saw a queen. "Okay," Dominic whispered, a fierce pride warring with his terror. "We end it together." The iron gates of the Blackwood Citadel groaned against the wind. Outside, the sky was a bruised purple heavy with a storm that refused to break. The air smelled of ozone and wet asphalt, the scent of violence. Dominic and Ivy walked out of the main keep side by side. They made a striking pair. Dominic was dressed in full combat tactical gear, black on black, an assault rifle slung across his chest, and a broadsword strapped to his back, a modern king prepared for ancient warfare. Beside him, Ivy looked like a phantom. She wore a fitted suit of white Kevlar weave that Dominic had commissioned for her, light enough to move in, but strong enough to stop a knife. Her hair was braided back, revealing the sharp, determined line of her jaw. Her eyes were already glowing with a faint, violet luminescence. Behind them, 200 of Dominic's elite royal guard marched in perfect unison, their boots hitting the pavement like a heartbeat of war. They stopped 10 yards from the gate. On the other side stood Beatrice. She had aged 10 years in the last week. Her face was gaunt, her makeup smeared, but her eyes were manic. Behind her stood her ragtag army of mercenaries and disgruntled minor Alpha's men who looked nervous, shifting their weight as they saw the sheer size of the king's forces. But in front of Beatrice knelt 12 young women. They were crying, their clothes torn, shivering in the cold wind. Around each of their necks was a thick silver collar with a blinking red light. Beatrice held a remote detonator in her hand, her thumb hovering over the red button. "Stop right there!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking. "One more step and I blow their heads off. Do you hear me, Dominic? I'll paint your gates with their blood." Dominic held up a hand. The entire royal guard froze instantly. The discipline was terrifying. "Beatrice." Dominic called out his voice, calm but amplified by the natural acoustics of the stone courtyard. "This is over. You are surrounded. Snipers are tracking you right now. Drop the remote and I will grant you a trial. Press it and you die before your body hits the ground." Beatrice laughed, a high, jagged sound. "A trial? So you can lock me away, while this mutt sits on a throne? I think not." She stepped forward, grabbing the hair of the nearest hostage, a girl no older than 16. The girl whimpered, squeezing her eyes shut. "Look at her!" Beatrice yelled at the crowd, pointing a manicured finger at Ivy. "Look at your queen. She is a servant, a bastard born of a whore in a ditch. She has no blood. She has no power. She bewitched your king with cheap tricks." The mercenaries behind her muttered. They had heard the rumors of the White Wolf, but seeing Ivy now, small human, silent, they seemed emboldened. Maybe Beatrice was right. Maybe the king was weak. Dominic's growl started low in his chest, a rumble that shook the gravel on the ground. He moved to step forward. Ivy put a hand on his chest. "Wait," she said softly. "Ivy, she has the trigger." Dominic hissed, his muscles coiled tight. "She won't use it yet," Ivy said, her eyes locked on Beatrice. "She wants an audience. She wants to humiliate me first." Ivy stepped away from Dominic. She walked forward past the guards into the open space between the armies. She was completely exposed. "Ivy!" Dominic shouted, panic edging his voice. Ivy didn't stop until she was 5 feet from the gate. She looked through the iron bars at the woman who had tormented her for 15 years. She saw the lines of cruelty around Beatrice's mouth. She saw the fear behind the madness. "Hello, stepmother," Ivy said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried on the wind, clear as a bell. Beatrice sneered. "Get back in the kennel, rat. You don't speak to your betters." "I have no betters here," Ivy said. The silence that followed was heavy. "You call me a bastard," Ivy continued, her voice gaining strength. "You call my mother a whore, but you knew, didn't you? You knew who she was. That's why you burned her journals. That's why you kept me in the basement." Beatrice's eyes widened slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Liar," Ivy said. She didn't shout. She just stated it like a fact. Ivy closed her eyes. She reached deep inside herself, past the fear. past the years of abuse, finding the white-hot core of magic that had awakened during her shift. She tugged on the thread of her ancestry. When she opened her eyes, they weren't just glowing, they were burning with violet flames. The air around her began to warp, the temperature dropping 20 degrees in a second. Frost began to creep across the pavement, spreading out from her boots like a spiderweb. "I am Ivy Valerius," she announced. The name seemed to echo bouncing off the mountains. "Daughter of Serene, last of the White Wolf bloodline, true heir to the Silver Moon territories." Gasps erupted from the mercenaries behind Beatrice. The name Valerius was a ghost story to them, a legend of power. "And you," Ivy said, pointing at Beatrice, "are trespassing in my kingdom." "Kill her!" Beatrice screamed, panic taking over. She turned to her men. "Shoot her! Shoot her now!" A mercenary raised his rifle. Bang! The shot rang out, but the bullet never reached Ivy. Dominic was there. He had moved with supernatural speed, placing his body between Ivy and the gate. The bullet sparked off his heavy tactical armor, harmless. "Open fire!" Dominic roared. Hell broke loose. The Royal Guard unleashed a barrage of suppressive fire. The mercenaries scrambled for cover. Beatrice shrieked and jammed her thumb down on the detonator. "No!" Dominic shouted, turning to the hostages. He expected an explosion. He expected blood. Instead, there was a sound like shattering glass. Ivy had raised both hands, her fingers splayed. Arcs of violet lightning shot from her palms, bypassing the gate, bypassing Beatrice, and striking the silver collars on the hostages. The magic didn't detonate them. It fried them. The collars sparked, short-circuited by the surge of raw magical energy, and popped open, falling uselessly to the ground. The red lights died. Beatrice stared at the remote in her hand, clicking it frantically. Nothing happened. "Run!" Ivy commanded the hostages. "Run to the sides." The girls scrambled away, weeping as the firefight intensified. "You useless bitch!" Beatrice screamed. She threw the remote at Ivy and shifted. Her shift was ugly, a brown matted wolf, foaming at the mouth. She squeezed through a gap in the damaged gates, driven by pure insanity, charging straight for Ivy. Dominic raised his rifle to put her down. "Mine!" Ivy yelled. She didn't wait. She ran toward the charging wolf. Mid-stride, she leapt into the air. A flash of blinding white light consumed her. When she landed, she was the White Wolf. She was a blur of speed, a ghost in the chaos. Beatrice's wolf was larger, heavier, fueled by years of gluttony. She snapped her jaws, aiming for Ivy's throat. But Ivy was fluid. She ducked under the clumsy bite, her white fur bristling. She slammed her shoulder into Beatrice's flank, using the older wolf's momentum against her. Beatrice tumbled onto the asphalt. Ivy didn't let up. She was on top of her instantly. This wasn't a spar. This was an execution of justice. Beatrice snarled and raked her claws across Ivy's chest. Bright red blood stained the white fur. Dominic, firing his rifle to keep the mercenaries pinned down, saw the blood and roared, but he respected Ivy's command. He held the line, protecting her jewel. Ivy didn't flinch at the pain. She bit down hard on Beatrice's shoulder, shaking her head violently. Beatrice howled. Ivy released her and backed up. She wasn't just fighting with teeth, she was fighting with presence. She let out a growl that was layered with the alpha resonance of the Valerius line. It was a sound that commanded submission. Submit. The compulsion hit Beatrice like a hammer. Her wolf whined, her legs buckling against her will. She tried to fight it, tried to lunge again, but the ancient bloodline magic was too strong. Beatrice collapsed onto her belly, forced into a submissive posture by the sheer weight of Ivy's authority. The battlefield went quiet. The mercenaries stopped shooting. They watched, stunned, as the small white wolf stood over the larger brown one. The violet aura around Ivy was pulsing, visible even to human eyes now. Ivy placed one paw on Beatrice's neck. She could end it. One bite. She looked at Dominic. He was watching her. His weapon lowered his face, filled with a savage pride. Ivy leaned down. She didn't bite. She growled into Beatrice's ear, a low, terrifying sound that promised a fate worse than death. "You are nothing. You are exile. Run!" She lifted her paw. Beatrice, broken, humiliated, and stripped of her delusion, scrambled backward. She turned tail and ran. Not toward her army, but into the woods. A rogue. Alone. Ivy turned to the mercenaries, still huddled by the gate. She stared them down with her violet eyes. One by one, they dropped their weapons. They fell to their knees. The white wolf threw her head back and howled a sound of victory that cleared the storm clouds. A single ray of sunlight pierced the gloom, illuminating her blood-stained white coat like a crown. 3 months later, the obsidian hall was transformed. Gone were the dark, oppressive drapes and the air of fear that had defined Dominic's early reign. The windows were thrown open, letting in the crisp spring air. The hall was filled with white roses and purple lilacs. It was the coronation. The entire kingdom had gathered. Not just the wealthy alphas in their suits, but common wolves' village elders and representatives from the newly reclaimed Silver Moon territories. Dominic stood at the altar. He looked different. The hard lines of his face had softened. He smiled more. He wore the ceremonial black and gold uniform of the king, but he fidgeted with his cufflinks, nervous. "Relax, brother," Cain whispered, standing as his best man. "She's not going to run." "I know," Dominic murmured. I still can't believe she chose me." The music started. It wasn't the traditional, pompous royal march. It was a soft acoustic melody, a string quartet, playing a song that sounded like rain falling on leaves. The doors opened. The crowd stood as one. Ivy walked down the aisle. She wasn't wearing a traditional white gown. She wore a dress of pale silver silk that shimmered like moonlight. On her shoulders rested a cloak of deep velvet violet, the color of her eyes embroidered with the crest of the House of Blackwood and the House of Valerius entwined. She walked with her head held high. No longer the girl in the corner, no longer the luggage rack. She was radiant. She reached the altar. Dominic took her hands. His touch was warm, solid, her anchor. The high priestess bound their hands with a golden ribbon. "Do you, Dominic Blackwood, take this wolf to be your equal, your partner and your queen, to hunt with her, to bleed with her, to rule with her?" "I do," Dominic said, his voice thick with emotion, with every breath. "And do you, Ivy Valerius, take this wolf to be your equal, your partner and your king, to calm his storms and share his silence?" Ivy looked up at him. She saw the man who had looked at a servant and seen a queen. She saw the monster who had become a guardian. "I do," she whispered. "Forever." The priestess placed the crowns on their heads. Dominic's was heavy gold. Ivy's was a delicate circlet of platinum and moonstone. "I present to you," the priestess announced to the cheering crowd, "King Dominic and Queen Ivy, the Alpha and the White Wolf." Dominic didn't wait for the applause to die down. He pulled Ivy close and kissed her. It was a kiss that promised a lifetime of devotion. As they turned to face their people, Dominic leaned down to whisper in her ear. "You know," he said, a playful glint in his eye, "I think I finally found a proposal I couldn't refuse." Ivy laughed, the sound free and joyful. She squeezed his hand. "And I think," she replied, "I finally found a corner where I don't have to hide." Outside the sun was shining. The winter of the Ice King was over. The reign of the White Wolf had begun. And that is the story of how the unwanted girl became the most powerful queen in history. It reminds us that sometimes the people who are ignored by the world are the ones holding the most power. They are just waiting for the right person to see them. Ivy didn't need a crown to be worthy. She was worthy the moment she stood up for herself. Dominic didn't save her. He simply gave her the space to save herself. If this story touched your heart, or if you just loved seeing Beatrice get exactly what she deserved, please give this video a big thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a romance story. Do you think Beatrice got off too easy with exile, or was living as a rogue a worse punishment than death? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.